Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Ekiet, dear Svetlana, distinguished guests, students. Let me first of all say how honored I am to be here, to be invited to this great university and to be able to speak to you today. I feel like I know the Harvard Kennedy School very well. It's my husband's alma mater, and 20 years later, as with anyone who has ever studied here, it still comes up in every second conversation they have. And I think this is testament to the prestige of this university and its lasting impact. And I say it to give it some context. 20 years ago, I was campaigning for my country to join the European Union. I was still a student, learning the ins and outs of politics. It was a very hard-fought campaign. But I believed passionately then that my generation's place was in Europe. And that is something I believe still. The transformational impact of Europe on our societies, on our communities, on our standards, our economy, our environment meant everything to us. It was about our security, our strength in unity, and I think at its most basic, the comfort of belonging. We won that campaign. We took our seat at the table. And I think very often of those days. And when we look to Ukraine, to Moldova, to the Western Balkans, I know how existential this is to people in those countries. So when we talk, and I'll focus on the title, which puzzled me a little bit when I saw it, of struggle and relevance and value, we must understand that for millions, the concept of Europe is everything. It's not just a destination. It is a way of life and a way of living. It is a sometimes lonely light that defends liberal democracies, free markets, social safety nets, and personal freedoms. It's far from perfect. I share many of the frustrations with our processes. But even with our imperfections, Europe is worth it. It is this belief that has meant that the transatlantic relationship has survived the test of time, the test of some administrations. I sat with an American journalist earlier, and the idea of the US as a shining city on a hill was almost used in jest. But for so many people around the world who still live in the shadow of autocracy or under the threat of aggression, the US and the EU have not lost that shine. We tend to forget that still today, more people across the world live under autocracy than under democracy. Just look at the struggle that Svetlana faces every day. Dear Svetlana, I address you. I cannot emphasize enough the strength that I draw from your courage and from your resilience. I am humbled by how far your people are willing to go for what we here take for granted every single day. It is because of you and people that are fighting with you that Belarus will be free. Svetlana and the people Svetlana and the people that she fights for live an everyday struggle for freedom, a word thrown around so often that it has lost its meaning to many. We take so much for granted, being able to vote for who we like, or read independent journalism, being able to assemble, say what we want, debate and disagree, pursue our happiness, live and love as we choose without consequence. Many were surprised and are surprised every day to find out that there are those who still call this into question. So Europe and the United States have a duty and a responsibility. And we need to live up to that together. To do this, we cannot be afraid to lead. Perhaps we thought we won in 1989 with the fall of the wall and the collapse of communism in much of Europe. If there was one lesson that we learned brutally on the 24th of February last year, is that the battle continues. And Ukraine is standing up for the promise of Europe, for the values that we share. The Second World War may have ended in 1945, but for millions it would be another 50 years before they could be free. Our member states in Central and Eastern Europe know what is at stake in Ukraine. They lived through it for generations. And we can break the cycle of history and consign aggression and imperialism to the history books where they belong. This takes courage, it takes leadership. And when Europe and the US are called upon, we cannot turn away. Looking back, I cannot say that we have turned away. We have not. I am incredibly proud of our response, of the resilience that we have seen in the last year. In Ukraine, we have matched our rhetoric with action, with support. I'm well aware that there are those who question the involvement of the European Union and the United States, for that matter. Those who prefer to pretend that what is happening in Ukraine is not real, or who seek to excuse war crimes and breaches of international law. Those who prefer the simplicity of propaganda to the stark reality of war. Those who think they are too far away to care. To those I say, the price of liberty is not too high. The European Union has prevented conflict within its borders by promoting, not subjugating, the interests of its citizens, by protecting democracy, the rule of law, the respect for human dignity in all its member states. Peace must remain the ultimate goal, but in order for there to be peace, there must be a Ukraine, and there will not be a Ukraine without our support. Last year in Germany, Bishop Dieser of Aachen said, and I quote, "The European Union does not need to conquer or destroy anyone in order to be and to remain itself, but it is now having to learn in deep and brutal distress how seriously jeopardized its values and achievements are, and how many people who also strive for these values are dying or being robbed of their happiness." Dear friends, democracy requires effort. Democracy requires bravery. Democracy requires leadership. And leadership will be necessary to weather the storm of what we call polycrisis on both sides of the Atlantic. We are facing a war, and with a post-pandemic economic recovery that remains far too fragile, energy bills and inflation still high, people finding it harder to stretch salaries to the end of the month. We have migration challenges that are yet to be properly addressed, raw materials that are becoming scarcer and damaging global supply chains, a climate catastrophe that cannot be ignored, corruption damaging public trust everywhere, rule of law challenges that threaten people's rights. Now, the EU and the US may well be old and close allies, but as the global economy struggles to recover, we need to become ever closer friends and form stronger, mutually beneficial economic, social, and security ties. We need to avoid a race to the bottom. This is why a renewal of our transatlantic alliance is crucial if we are to face up to the new and very dangerous realities shaping our societies and communities. It is true that there are those who wish to turn the clock back 100 years, and we must be ready to meet that very real challenge. Now, the challenges are many, and they are not only external. Take the movement of people, for example. Any business owner or financial expert will tell you that people are needed in order for our economies to continue to grow, to fill jobs, and to ensure business models continue. At the same time, people also want to keep their villages and hometowns exactly as they believed they were 50 years ago. We hear less about the benefits and beauty of diversity, and more about sort of false nostalgia for a way of life we like to think existed once. So in a nutshell, we want all the benefits of a strong global economy without any of the cost. And this is just one example of what we all face, of how easy it is to sell simple solutions or catchphrases that do not actually exist. At the moment, in Europe and on this side of the Atlantic, we are seeing these issues being used to bring back identity politics in a crude attempt to win elections by appealing to the very worst in our nature. It is the use of misinformation to create the other upon which we blame all of our ills, or the concept of the mysterious elite ruling in DC or in Brussels. It is a tactic as old as politics. And its intention is not to solve problems or make people's lives a little bit easier or a little bit safer. It is the last port of call for those with no answers, for whom power is of itself a goal. And we need to counter this narrative and push back or watch as our societies turn on themselves, fueled by misinformation and distrust. To do that, we need to rebuild the center of our political landscape back into the force of global positive change we know it to be. Compromise, studied moderation are not outdated concepts. Indeed, they are the only way forward. Every major issue faced by Europe in the last decade has seen us emerge from it by getting closer together. The financial crisis, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, rule of law challenges, migration, security and defense. Our approach has been to move together, to pool our resources, to cooperate more. We need to keep that trajectory going. That's not to say that Europe is homogeneous or trying to be, far from it. We are all different. And yet, we believe we should have the same chance, that we are fundamentally all better off when we act together. The EU and the US are two of the strongest economic blocs on the planet, but our true strength lies in the fact that we are both not only about economics, but about something far deeper than that. We have a shared dream, a shared promise. All of us on either side of the Atlantic must make our voice heard in defense of strong, value-based politics, or we risk getting drowned out by populism and giving fuel to those for whom our way of life, simply by existing, is a threat. So finally, we need to recapture that sense of hope, of optimism, of understanding. We need to keep listening, we need to keep explaining, and we need to keep delivering. That is how we can recreate the political center and avoid a retreat to the comfort of the fringes and the easy answers to difficult questions peddled by populists. That is how we ensure that our liberal democracies can answer people's concerns by showing tangibly the value of democracy, of liberty, every day. We need to do that better. This is our moment, the time for our generation to pick up the mantle, to reaffirm the need and value of democracy, of multilateralism. I am convinced that we can meet this moment. Thank you.